The subcommittee meets today to receive testimony on the current and future cyber workforce requirements of the Department of Defense and military services. Our witnesses include Mr. John Sherman, Acting Department of Defense Chief Information Officer, Ms. Veronica Hinton, Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for Defense for Civilian Personnel Policy, Mr. Leonard Litton, Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for Defense for Military Personnel Policy, and Lieutenant General Dennis Crall, Director, Command and Control, Communications, Cyber, Computer Cyber, and Chief Information Officer, Joint Staff J6. In March, welcome. Thank you. In March, General Nakasone testified to the full committee that U.S. Cybercom conducted 24 operations to counter foreign threats to the 2020 election, and threats that followed on the heels of Russia's tampering with the 2016 election. And in December, we learned that foreign hackers had penetrated software widely used by the U.S. government and the private sector and went undetected for months, exposing thousands of public and private networks to exploitation. This election interference and SolarWinds hack recently prompted President Biden to issue a new round of sanctions against Russia. But make no mistake about it, Russia is not our only adversary. Cyber intrusions and attacks from all quarters will only increase moving forward, and it's our responsibility to ensure that we have the capability to defend the United States on this new front. The need for an effective, talented, and diverse cyber workforce within the Department of Defense, the military services, and really across the whole of government has never been clearer. Growing and maintaining a cyber capability sufficient to prevent these attacks and to meet national defense objectives starts with the people behind the keyboard. Our ability to field the world's strongest military has always come from the collective talent and dedication of our service members and the civilian workforce who support them. We must recognize and commit to meeting these new threats by developing, fielding, and maintaining the world's most capable cyber force. That brings us to the topic we will discuss today. In short, how do we recruit and retain the very best for civilian and military service in the cyber workforce? How do we attract top talent, hire them, pay them, manage them, and keep them? How do we keep their skills fresh and provide meaningful career progression and professional development to ensure we have a cyber workforce with the defensive capability to protect the nation's networks and the offensive capability to deter aggression, not just by traditional cyber adversaries like China and Russia, but also by the likes of Iran, North Korea, non-state actors, and criminal cartels? What is the proper role for the reserve component, especially the National Guard? What are the personnel policy implications of sustainable and effective management with the private sector? I'm especially interested in our witnesses' views on the proper civilian-military mix for the cyber workforce of tomorrow, how we set the course to achieve that mix, and how we ensure that our cyber workforce possesses the very best talent America has to offer. Lastly, I want to know why the Department of Defense has been slow to implement some of the authorities it already has to hire and retain the best cyber personnel, such as the ability to directly hire cyber personnel we enacted in Section 502 in fiscal year 2019 NDAA. I'm also interested in the status of the authorities Congress passed in last year's NDAA regarding Cyber Reserve, Cyber Mission Force, and the National Guard cyber workforce. Have these and other previous authorities to attract and retain the best cyber personnel resulted in the expansion and improvements necessary for the DOD to detect and defeat the cyber intrusions and attacks we are now facing? Again, I'm so grateful to our witnesses here today. I welcome them all and appreciate hearing your testimony. What we will do is we will take your testimony now, but when Senator Tillis returns, we will pause in your testimony so he can give us opening remarks. I will run and go vote, and then I will come back and you can continue your testimony. But we will not postpone the hearing for the vote. We'll just keep it running. Our first witness, Mr. Litton, would you like to go first?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Chairwoman General Brand and distinguished members, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the health of the DOD cyber workforce. I appreciate your support on this very important issue. My role in performing the duties of the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Military Personnel Policy is primarily an enabling one. So I will speak to the overarching military personnel policies that support the services, enable them to access, support, and attain and retain a highly ready force. The Department does desire to be the employer of choice, not only for individuals with cyber-related skills, but for all Americans who are looking and working hard every day to join the military. Enabling our cyber forces to operate and defend against today's threats will require us to maintain the authorities and resources we have now, but also ensure that our warriors are properly assessed, compensated, and retained to fight and win against these threats. As you know, ma'am, the military services conduct a whole-person assessment of each candidate who applies for either an officer commissioning or the enlisted force. This holistic process looks at a number of factors, including citizenship, age, education, physical fitness, conduct, and aptitude. The general model is to recruit and assess a qualified field of applicants, placing them in a best fit occupational specialty and career trajectory, and provide them the necessary technical training to meet those operational objectives. This process provides a steady pipeline of highly qualified personnel for the required tasks. The military services can also employ an accession option known as lateral entry. This process allows the active and reserve components to recruit highly qualified individuals directly from industry to fill those critical requirements and bring them in advanced grades based on their previous level of education and experience. The military service academies and Reserve Officer Training Corps also have programs focused on attracting young, talented officers into the cyber fields. For enlisted accessions, the services utilize an array of assessments designed to understand the technical training, including cyber. For example, in enlisted cyber specialties, the services utilize a combination of the ASVAB and targeted cyber knowledge test called the cyber test to identify applicants with specific aptitude for cyber career field accessions. Additionally, we continuously evaluate new types of assessments. For example, a fluid intelligence test called complex reasoning was recently developed, and we hope to have that ready in the 2024 timeframe to help us better attract and identify cyber capabilities among those who apply. The Department realizes that military members with cyber experience are in great demand and can command top salaries within the private sector. In addition, we have a robust military compensation package and a toolkit of bonuses and incentives and special pays designed to attract and retain these service members with cyber skills. We have the authority for enlistment bonuses, and we thank you for that, up to $50,000 for those who agree to serve at least 2 years in the specified career field, as well as retention bonuses up to $30,000 per year of service obligation. The services also have the authority to offer other monetary and non-monetary incentives for service in certain cyber-related occupational specialties. Non-monetary incentives may include choice of duty assignment, guaranteed training, advanced education, and other professional development opportunities. Additional monetary incentives include the authority for assignment incentive and special duty pays that can be as much as $5,000 per month. The Department prides itself on building a strong and viable total force that delivers combat capability around the globe. Our cyber personnel are and will remain a critical component of the Department's ability to defend the nation. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sherman.
Ma'am, good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to testify today regarding the efforts of the Department of Defense to enhance the cyber workforce across our enterprise. My name is John Sherman. I am the Acting Department of Defense Chief Information Officer, a position I've held since 20 January. I work alongside my colleagues to establish policy and provide oversight, direction, and guidance for the cyber workforce. We have come far in focusing our efforts to be proactive, agile, and competitive in order to recruit and retain the most innovative individuals with high-demand skill sets, while also encouraging increased representation of minorities and women. I would like to highlight how my office is developing the cyber workforce through new policies and governance using my existing oversight. I will speak to how we are leveraging special hiring authorities granted to us by Congress and how we are recruiting from a diverse pool of candidates. However, there is still work to be done. We put many of the key foundational mechanisms in place and have actively leveraged the tools at our disposal, but we must build on the progress by updating our overarching strategy to ensure our workforce is prepared to implement zero trust and the other latest approaches to defending our enterprise. Our existing cyber strategy from 2018 provides some key points on the cyber workforce, but we need a more holistic North Star to guide our future cyber workforce efforts. I've given my office direction that drafting and coordinating this new strategy is a priority going forward. Our DOD cyber workforce is comprised of individuals including military, civilian, and contractor personnel. Our goal has been to refine and hone this critical workforce, but we first had to define its composition and ensure we had a solid workforce management structure. To do this, we created and implemented the DOD Cyber Workforce Framework, which has enabled my office to establish a standard lexicon to describe the scope of work in this cyber field. We then identified and analyzed cyber work roles with greater specificity in order to inform workforce priorities and initiatives beyond the legacy occupational descriptions, which are too broad in many cases. To fully realize the potential of this framework, we are developing a new policy series called 8140, which will drive implementation and compliance of our vision. In 2015, Department leadership signed the associated DOD directive and then updated it in late last year. The instruction and manual for this policy series are in the final stages of coordination, and we're working with department stakeholders to get these over the goal line in the coming months, if not sooner. Additionally, we established a tri-chaired forum called the Cyber Workforce Management Board to govern and oversee implementation of the activities in the policy series with representation from my office, the Undersecretary for Personnel and Readiness, and the Principal Cyber Advisor. We recognize this whole of department challenge and our approach must match. Very importantly, we have leveraged the Cyber Accepted Service, or CES, personnel system to meet more quickly the immediate need of the department. We now have over 9,000 positions designated for CES across 10 DOD components, and we plan to increase this number even more later this year as Army Cyber comes into the fold. Moreover, we're taking lessons learned on workforce feedback related to their decisions on moving into the CES to inform ways we can socialize this great opportunity even more effectively in the future. Meanwhile, we're also conducting the congressionally directed zero-based review of cybersecurity personnel. Once complete, the ZBR will provide us with the input to conduct data-driven analysis of our current and future workforce needs. We are aiming to complete the initial phases of data gathering by September and look forward to updating the committee later this year as directed in legislation. While we have improved our ability to identify and develop the cyber workforce in the past 3 years, I recognize we still have work to do, especially as we move out on zero trust. This is an approach based on extensive network segmentation and protection of the data in the systems with an assumption that adversaries have already breached the perimeter at some point. For this and other evolving cyber strategies, we can expect to draw an even wider range of skill sets in areas like data and artificial intelligence. I am confident that our workforce now and in the future is up to the challenge and am proud of their ongoing work to build, secure, operate, defend, conduct intelligence activities, and enable operations through cyberspace. We realize that it's an ever-changing space, however, where continual workforce updates and upskilling will be critical. Our adversaries are definitely not standing still, and we mustn't either. Finally, I'm committed to continue our efforts to reach out to all of this nation's human capital through an ongoing focus of the National Security Agency Cybersecurity Scholarship Program and Centers of Academic Excellence accreditations. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today, and I'm grateful for the attention you have dedicated to Secretary Austin's top 3 priorities on taking care of our people. I stand ready to answer questions.
I'd like to introduce Senator Tillis for his opening remarks. I will run and go vote, and then when you're completed, you can call on Ms. Hinton and then Lieutenant General Crall, and I'll be back ASAP.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for being here today. I'm sorry I was late. We're doing the tag team for voting. I just want to say the success in the cyber domain is uniquely reliant on highly skilled personnel. We all know that. We've had several discussions and meetings about it. Where stealth technology and smart weapons provide the United States with a discernible advantage in traditional warfighting domains. The U.S. military does not enjoy a similar technological advance when it comes to cyberspace. Rather, we must rely on the intelligence, creativity, and cunning of our people if we're to be successful with this rapidly changing environment. Fortunately, this country still produces the world's most innovative cyber talent. The Department of Defense's challenge is to make itself appealing to that talent. Since success in cyberspace is so heavily dependent on skilled people, the last several NDAAs included numerous provisions focused on military and DOD civilian workforce. I look forward to asking questions about the creative recruiting and retention ideas, some of the authorities that we've given, whether or not they've been fully implemented, and what more authorities and creative thinking we should consider to be absolutely certain we're bringing the best and brightest into the cyber domain within the Department of Defense. So thank you all for being here. We'll continue the introductions. Ms. Hinton.
Ranking Member Tillis, thank you for the opportunity to appear at today's hearing to discuss the health and readiness of the DOD cyber workforce. Today, as the Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Civilian Personnel Policy, I am representing the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness, the Department's Chief Human Capital Officer, to discuss matters related to the civilian cyber workforce. Important to this discussion is the acknowledgement that we live in a relentlessly evolving and fiercely competitive world where technological achievements are driving immense change across political, economic, and social landscapes. As such, the Department strives to cultivate a technologically dominant force that is strategically ready, globally relevant, and flexibly sustainable. Competition for high-quality, experienced cyber workforce personnel is constant and increasingly aggressive. However, the Department shares your vision and commitment to pursuing, recruiting, and retaining world-class cyber talent to advance and achieve the DoD's unique mission. DoD is one of the 3 largest markets for cyber talent in the United States due to its size, its continuous adoption and adaptation of technology, and its extensive mission requirements. Therefore, we must be tenacious in not only fully utilizing the appointment and compensation flexibilities that Congress has provided, but must increasingly invest in human capital initiatives, training and development for the civilian cyber workforce. This focus includes designing and implementing programs and policies that eliminate any barriers and inefficiencies that may detract from our ability to acquire needed and diversified talent, expand pathways to service, and enable a flexible workplace essential to the future of work. Additionally, we are expanding our outreach, including with the private sector, to recruit top talent from across all segments of society, while retaining and compensating current technical talent and closing mission-critical gaps. To assess our progress, the Department has established capability to identify, evaluate, and manage the civilian cyber workforce, and is also leaning forward, utilizing advanced data analytics and technological tools to better match potential candidates and current employees against talent and competency gaps in various locations across the globe, providing real-time solutions to organizational needs. We are working closely with industry experts and the cyber community to build hiring assessments that will better match top talent to specific competency and skills needs, reducing time to hire and equipping hiring managers with the best talent. In recent years, Congress has provided several DoD-exclusive civilian hiring authorities that are helping to meet our objectives. In particular, Section 1109 of the National Defense Authorization Act of fiscal year 2020 granted streamlined and enhanced direct hire authorities, including an expanded direct hire authority for cyber workforce positions. The expansion of this coverage has been beneficial in that it has allowed the Department the ability to directly hire for any and all critical cyber skill sets. The Department is also utilizing a variety of compensation tools, including the use of federal-wide special salary rates and the added flexibility of the cyber accepted service that allows the Department to implement targeted local market supplements for certain cyber occupations and location. The Department appreciates such authorities, which expand our toolkit and are much needed to attract and retain the best talent and compete with the private sector for the same skill sets. The department further acknowledges that civilian personnel policy should be as clear and concise as possible. We are committed to ensuring that we are training and assisting human resource professionals and managers alike in the use of cyber personnel management authorities and flexibilities. This not only includes streamlined and efficient guidance on the use of the authorities and implementation procedures, but also gathering and analyzing data to better equip practitioners with the necessary information to proactively address emerging requirements. The Office of Personnel and Readiness continues to ensure that information disseminated across the department encompasses the full spectrum of hiring options that enable hiring managers to reach the right talent at the right time. We thank you for your continued interest and support of the DoD civilian workforce. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Hinton. General Crall.
Sir, thank you for the opportunity to share a few thoughts and then certainly get into your questions. It's very clear that the committee knows the challenge we face. We're about warfighting business and the Joint Staff, and the digital nature of the fight that we expect, especially at pace and speed, is going to demand a workforce and talent level that we have not seen before. The human-machine interface brings a demand that is going to have to be found, cultivated, educated, and implemented to get that level of experience as we learn and work our way through this new capability set. You've heard from my partners up here the number of efforts that are underway, but I take maybe a more sobering look at where the need lies ahead to make sure we fulfill your charge. You said to be absolutely certain that we're getting the right talent basically delivered at the right time, and I'm not absolutely certain. I had the opportunity to do some traveling with the Vice Chairman the week before and talk to some industry leaders, and I specifically challenged them as to how they went about finding the talent to fill the same billets that we're looking to fill, the same people with the same skill sets. And we always talk about money as being maybe the driving factor, but I learned some things that challenged my previous thinking on our approach to this. So while many of the endeavors that you've heard about and will hear today are certainly worthwhile as we work our way through feeling out what works best for us, I don't think we know our target audience as well as we need to. We need to find out what really motivates individuals to want to serve in the capacity that we're offering. We also need to do a better job in evaluating the very programs that we're describing. I don't believe, while they're interesting to approach and employ, they may not all deliver in the way that we expect, and we certainly want to tweak the ones that can be maximized to deliver that output, and maybe retire some that aren't working. So we owe a better understanding and study of our own efforts and our own audience. So while I'm excited and optimistic at the opportunity to get after fulfilling this talent range that we need, I am concerned about pace. I think the divide between the need is growing compared to what we're able to fulfill. I'm not sure we're closing the gap, and I think time is ticking for us to do so. So the challenge is certainly understood, I think, on both ends, and we are looking to maximize the very empowerments that Congress gave us to get after this, but I think more time and more effort and a faster pace is needed, and probably a new approach to our thinking to make sure that we can meet the need. Thank you, sir. Look forward to your questions.
We'll wait on us, or we will see Senator Gillibrand go back, but I'll go ahead and ask some questions, and if she takes a little time, I'll ask more questions. But General, I'm going to ask Ms. Hinton a question second, but your comments made me reflect on a discussion I had yesterday with the Personnel Subcommittee staff. I worked in research and development and product management back in the 80s, and I was trying to think about we were having a tough time attracting talent back then. This is a perpetual problem in the private sector and even more difficult, I think, in the government sector. But one thing that we had in place that I don't even know how we would structure it here, but you have these highly motivated, technically competent software and hardware engineers that we created an economic incentive to, on their day job, work on fulfilling their mission set, to use your terms, but if they chose on weekends and nights to come up with something creative that was relevant to what you were doing, but was created, we had an economic and other reward systems that encouraged that sort of extracurricular activity. Have any thought for any of the panelists, any thought on the applicability of that same sort of thing that still continues to this day in a lot of the software and hardware research and development shops, how something like that would even work, or whether or not it would make sense given your mission goals?
Sir, it's interesting because that overlaps quite well, even the time frame that you set. I'll be careful because my observations, I believe, are anecdotal. I had a chance to talk to probably a few dozen individuals who are right squarely in the market of the type of individual we want to recruit. And what I found interesting was their answers were almost identical. So not a true statistical sampling that I would trust necessarily, but this is what has me some pause. Not only did the CEOs and CIOs tell me this, I discovered it for myself. The number one area that came back and feedback to me was people want to live where they want to live. The idea of moving to some place they don't want to live, no matter what other feature is offered, is apparently quite unattractive. And if you look at some of the hubs that we have to offer, that's going to be a challenge for us. There are some interesting solutions, given the work and the nature that maybe we need to explore about creating spaces where that work can be done literally anywhere, as long as the security environment is set for that. But living in the community they want to live in seemed to be a strong driving factor. The other one was in team composition, which gets after what you described. The hierarchy of the government isn't something that's really motivating to them at all. They want a flat organization where everyone has equal input into driving an outcome. For many of them, wearing the uniform was not attractive. They like working hours from noon till 3 a.m. Is their prime working hours. And again, does it matter if productivity is there? Our organizations don't normally look like that.
I even had a ponytail back in the day.
Yes, sir.
It wasn't a good look.
Student debt was more important than the salary itself, which seemed odd to me because it appeared that higher salaries could retire student debt, maybe over time. But they looked certainly at the idea of what programs could address the debt they're in. And the last piece that we did very well in, the reason we were even having the conversation, was cause. They want to work for a cause, something that's meaningful, something that's viable, not just simply to make money. And the government, especially the Department of Defense, was unusually attractive to them to give back some level of service and to do activities they couldn't do in other jobs. So, again, sir, that's maybe just a few ideas that I learned in that.
Well, thank you. I'm going to yield back to the chair and then reserve the right for a second round. That's okay. Absolutely. Thank you. Well, Ms. Hinton, I will ask you a question. I do have some for the other witnesses, but I'm kind of curious about your view of the cyber accepted service, what's working, what's not working, particularly interested in loan repayment benefit.
Yes, sir. So cyber accepted service has given us incredible flexibilities that aren't resident in traditional civil service authorities. In particular, we have found great use in the hiring authorities that are associated with cyber accepted service, that ability to target our recruitment opportunities to get the talent that we need. Another piece of the cyber accepted service that has been beneficial has been the compensation authorities. In particular, we have recently rolled out targeted local market supplements that enable us to compensate at a higher level for 7 areas. And so it gives us that ability, while General Crall mentions that compensation isn't the only factor that weighs in an individual's decision to serve. It certainly is a factor, and our ability to compete with the industry through those compensation flexibilities help us get at that targeted skill set that we need. Additionally, with cyber accepted service, it gives us some authorities to think about how we classify work, how we organize work, how we describe work, and how we look at the qualifications associated with the individuals that we need. I will say that there are some challenges with cyber accepted service, and I would really back that up to a broader perspective in the whole cyber-coded workforce, which is not just cyber-accepted service. So first, as we think about compensation authorities that were given, we are still held to the existing pay caps that we have under Title V. So while we have some flexibility to change policies and processes associated with how we compensate, we're still held to the higher limits. And so that really doesn't make us, in certain areas, as competitive as we could be to get at certain talent. The other sort of nexus with cyber accepted service that I would highlight is that it is tied to United States Cyber Command and those supporting elements. And so when we think about the cyber workforce writ large, cyber accepted service is just one subcomponent of a broader cyber mission set. And so as we think about where there are opportunities to expand the use of cyber accepted service, we have had to look at what are some different ways that we can determine what are elements that are supporting Cyber Command on a position-by-position basis to be able to expand that authority. So that is one area where I think there's opportunity to look at the authority and see, does it have broader application, broader use. Additionally, there are some authorities in some of our sister alternative personnel systems, like Acquisition Demonstration Project, or our Defense Civilian Intelligence Personnel System, that allow for some additional flexibilities around streamlined classification that I think would bolster the cyber accepted service. But all in all, we're very thankful for this authority. It has given us additional flexibility, and I will defer to Mr. Sherman for additional information about.
I'm going to come back with questions for Mr. Sherman. I particularly want to know about the current loan benefit, and back to Mr. Crall, or General Crall's point, I do think that they place a value on that, even though the compensation may be offsetting. There's something attractive about just getting that debt retired as quickly as possible. But I'm going to ask some additional questions. I'll defer back to the chair.
Thank you very much. For the whole panel, the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence has recommended a digital academy to address a skills gap in cyber workforce hiring, which will be fully accredited and independent from the government, with students doing government and private sector internships during breaks. The Department of Defense does have some existing authorities to address the skills gap now. We talked about the CES program. And there also exists authority from the Department of Defense to grant cyber scholarships, paying for up to 3 years of college. And there's, of course, the ROTC commissioning programs that currently pay for up to 4 years of college, and even for graduate and professional school beyond 4 years in some cases. So for each of you, I'd like to start with Ms. Hinton and then go to Lieutenant General Crall, then Mr. Sherman, then Mr. Litton. What are the most important components to consider regarding this recommendation for a digital academy? Is this a necessary step? And could we also work to fill the skills gap from diverse sources using existing authorities such as the cyber scholarships or a generous ROTC program?
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand. That's a great question. And we are very interested in the Digital Academy as another potential federal-wide avenue to reach the talent that we need. Certainly in the department, as we look through standing up the Defense Civilian Training Corps, which is an authority that we received recently, we've thought through how and what type of academic programs we need in order to reach this talent. And the Digital Academy would be another complementary avenue for us to be able to identify that diverse segment of the population and to bring them into federal service and to entice them into federal service. In particular, to Senator Tillis's point around student loan repayments, the ability to offer paid education in exchange for service to the country is an area where we think that will enable us to reach this talent and entice them and attract them to support not just the Department of Defense, but from a U.S. Digital Academy perspective, benefit to the entire government. In terms of authorities that we use to attract the diverse workforce, I will mention again that the Streamlined Direct Hire Authority that Congress has has granted us, so generously granted us, has been an incredible tool for us to be able to target our recruitment and outreach in complement with our scholarship programs. In particular, when we look at our cyber student hiring authorities, we see that even if I look at fiscal year 21, we've been able to attract 20% of our cyber student hires have been Asian Americans. We see in our cyber accepted service, 20% of our cyber accepted service hires have been African Americans. So these hiring flexibilities make a difference for us to go out and target the diverse segments of the country, and then the scholarship programs add that additional bonus of enticing them to serve in exchange for their paid education. Thank you.
Lieutenant General Crall.
Ma'am, to your specific question about the Digital Academy, I really don't know whether that's a good idea or not a good idea. I think through the throughput and what the volume of that academy might produce might really be the answer. What I have found interesting is attending 2 universities last week, meeting with staffs on what degrees they offer and what motivates them and how they build curricula. It seems that there is a very willing audience in the university system writ large to cater to this audience. And some of our more technical universities have created what's almost a human supply chain with industry to build the very individual that can be placed immediately into the corporate world. And that means they come with security clearances, background, training for the years and internships that build up to that long-term relationship. That may be buttressed by the naval or the ROTC programs at large for all the services, to include service in the Guard. There's a lot of opportunities, but the National Center of Academic Excellence in Cybersecurity, that whole apparatus, which is a formal partnership, I think is up to over 80 schools now. And the last 2 schools that we looked at were just joining that consortium, which lays out that curricula and provides an interface with the department, again, to build that cyber warrior for which we're looking. And then all these things can be applied on top of it to the internship, scholarships, et cetera. What I find lacking in this, though, is that the colleges and universities that have signed up for this thus far do not represent the full scope that we ought to be interacting with. I believe there's room for more diversity in the schools and outreach to make sure that we get greater participation.
Mr. Sherman.
Thank you, ma'am. I would agree with my colleagues' comments on this, and I want to build on what General Crall said. From my view as CIO, the Centers for Academic Excellence for Cyber, they do offer a pretty broad and diverse set of schools we can get to, everything from North Carolina A&T to NYU, from University of Missouri Columbia to Honolulu Community College. It's a broad swath there. I would certainly welcome a digital academy as an additional pipeline, but I wouldn't want to do it at the expense of this broad swath of schools from rural, urban, all across the country, HBCUs, larger universities, et cetera. What we have through the NSA Cybersecurity Scholarship Program, leveraging these Centers for Academic Excellence, back to what General Crall was saying about the pipeline of talent, I think it has been diverse, as Ms. Hinton indicated, for African Americans, Asian Americans, I would add Hispanics, Americans, Latinos, Latinas coming into our workforce. I would want to continue to leverage that, so I think a digital academy would be a good complement to that. But what we're doing on the CAE front with the broad swath of opportunity, I would want to keep that up as well because we are seeing return on investment there. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Each year, the military service academies and senior ROTC programs produce approximately 450 cyber officers for the military. Most of these universities with senior ROTC programs and, of course, the academies are certified as National Center for Academic Excellence in Cyber Defense Education by the NSA, and most as well have a cyber institute dedicated to research to promote the understanding of cyber and cyber to be used in defense. The Citadel, along with the 5 other senior military colleges, have each received approximately $1.5 million of federal funds to establish these cyber institutes as pilot programs on their campuses. And so I think your idea is very well taken, ma'am.
Mr. Tillis, Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Mr. Sherman. Last Congress, we authorized the Cybercom Enhanced Pay Authority. It was based on a generally viewed successful program out of DARPA. I understand that Cybercom has chosen not to implement that. Is that true, and what was the rationale for not doing it?
Sir, I'm going to tell you, I'm frankly not sure on that particular authority there. I'd have to go back and take that one for the record and check with General Nakasone on that, sir.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Litton, I just had a question about, I think it was the FY19 NDAA. It included several provisions to disrupt the standard tenured-based military career path. We were especially concerned with cyber careers. The Alternative Promotion Authority in particular meant to provide more flexibility for promotions. What's the current status?
Yes, sir. My understanding is that we have largely implemented that. If you're referring to our ability to rank officers on the promotion list based on their skills and abilities and our need for them in the service to be promoted before the other
military departments are authorized to use it?
Yes, sir, they are.
Thank you. General Crall, the Defense Digital Service, DDS, they put in place some innovative personnel policies, and we've seen some of the best cyber officers and enlisted spend time at DDS. What's special about it? And should we extend this kind of mindset to the broader military cyber workforce?
Yes, sir. I'm personally a huge fan of DDS for the very reasons you've mentioned. They approach problems in a non-conventional way. They're not intimidated by rank, structure, hierarchy. They seem to get to, yes, sir, very flat organization. They don't look like us. They don't act like us. But I found that the value of getting to the truth and getting to the bottom of something, that they operate at much greater speed. And again, their ability to recruit such a diverse population from all backgrounds, from all experiences, make the team composition one that's fairly complete, no blind spots. They're able to really fill some holes neatly and tailor their workforce to our very specific problem set. And the last piece I would offer is they appear to be very current because their operations and their influence and what they read and who they interact with comes from sources well outside of the department. So they have been extremely valuable, and I do agree that those lessons learned export quite well to the condition that I offered in my opening statement.
Yeah, I think that kind of creates a sort of cast a wider net for that organizational framework that I think works and that exists in the private sector.
Can you describe for the record what DDS is, how many people you have? Just describe it from start to finish.
Well, I apologize that I don't know the exact numbers that they have, but they are a small force. And that small force was created a few years back to get after these problem sets in a unconventional way. The recruitment for that team has been largely left up to the DDS leadership and was managed by the Secretary of Defense proper. And they had a pretty wide authority in their hiring. They could onboard very quickly. They could go seek the talent they needed. And they're very independent. In fact, when I first met them, they were almost Inspector General-like, meaning their level of independence, not beholden to anyone in the building, but to really get after truth was pretty impressive. And the speed with which they delivered was also impressive.
If we get back those details for the record.
For the record, so who do they report to? How many people are there? What is the salary range? Just so we can describe the program accurately to know if we should replicate it or augment it or make it bigger than it is today.
Yes, ma'am, I have that for action.
I did have a question that goes to education. I'll ask anybody on the panel that may want to ask it. I like the idea that we're investing in some of the military-oriented institutes, but what kind of a net have we cast? This may sound parochial, but if there are institutions like this elsewhere, then they should be included. But Montreat College, for example, in western North Carolina, just outside of Asheville, has had a 4-year cyber program for several years. It actually dates back to the time that I was Speaker of the House. We provided funding to help them stand up facilities and get that program going. They've had a couple of graduated classes now. So to what extent have we cast a wide net for any institutions, public or private, that look like they would be good feedstock and good places for investment to vector people into government service, either uniform service or civilian service.
So with the program, sir, with the ROTCs that I think you're referring to, it's 6 universities, Texas A&M, my alma mater, North Georgia, Virginia Tech, VMI, Virginia Military Institute, Citadel, and Norwich. So 6 of the civilian institutions with rather large ROTCs, Corps Cadets type functions. That was the initial group here with the initial grant investment, as Lynn indicated just a minute ago. I think in terms of expanding the net or expanding the applicability to this, we're very early in this to see how the return on investment turns out, but this was just an initial group of institutions that have established ROTCs, sir, and so I wouldn't see why we wouldn't want to expand in the future perhaps to similar institutions.
And Senator Gillibrand, if I can just ask one more question. Another discussion that came up in brainstorming about this is almost a civilian analog for the ROTC. Programs where you would put them in place, they would provide civilian service to the government. Where are we with that thinking, and to what extent do you all think that's a good idea?
Yes, sir. So as mentioned previously, we are working through establishing the Defense Civilian Training Corps, which is the concept that you mentioned, the ROTC-like program. We have developed an initial implementation plan and are still exploring and building out what that will look like. But to your point, we are looking across the nation at what institutions would have the right capabilities and program and curriculum to support not just acquisition, which is a priority area we're looking at under the Defense Civilian Training Corps, but also our modernization priorities. So when we look at that program coupled with the Defense Science, Mathematics, Research for Transformation, the Smart Defense Fellows Program. Sorry, I had to look down. I wanted to get that correct, which is one of our many scholarship programs that is offered throughout the country. We're going after those STEM technical areas to find that talent, and that's another area where we're looking at are there new outreach, new partnerships that we need to explore to find the diverse talent.
And you can do that under current authorities?
Yes, sir.
Well, the last open question really for maybe feedback for the record. I may have a couple of questions for the record too, would be any additional authorities or modification of current authorities that would help you better tackle this problem. Please get it to us. I'm sure that the chair agrees that would be helpful as we lead up to the NDA process. Thank you.
Our future military leaders across all specialties must be educated on cyber issues to ensure that our military remains the world's most effective fighting force. Professional military education institutions can ensure that world-class cyber faculty are positioned to teach our officers about the ways in which cyber strategy, policy, and operations affect the armed forces and shape the future conflict. Several questions. When it comes to institution on topics like cyber policy, strategy, and operations, how effective are professional military education institutions across the service branches? Number one, how is the effectiveness of professional military education institutions evaluated? To what extent are cyber programs and curricula standardized across the service branches? And what is the expected standard of performance for professional military education institutions and educational cyber programs across the service branches? Lieutenant General Crall.
Yes, ma'am, there's a lot there. So I would say that maybe taking it from the highest question and working down, I know that the National Defense University, for example, that has a program, its Cyber College, was the first that I was aware of to offer a senior level program rather than curricula off to the side or maybe electives, but really a full discipline aimed at building that cyber policy professional. That's kind of a rarity. Yes, ma'am.
So there's a lot of concern right now regarding the DOD's potential elimination of the College of Information and Cyberspace as a component institution of the National Defense University. And as you mentioned, CIC provides critical mission of consolidating intellectual resources and providing joint higher education for the nation's defense community. Now more than ever, we need every resource available to bring together and grow our military's knowledge base on cyber issues, and we really should not miss an opportunity to impart that knowledge on the military's rising leaders. With these concerns in mind, what's your long-term vision for the College of Information and Cyberspace at the National Defense University, and how can Congress help achieve that vision?
So, ma'am, I'll leave the chairman to maybe inform what his personal vision is. I'll give you my personal vision is I'm a big believer in that college, and I have hired many of the graduates from that program and have employed them, and I actually seek them out. So I think there's been tremendous value added with that program. The other aspect, as far as standardized training for leadership across all the services, we're clearly not there. There's a greater interest, and I find that our younger service members and civilians come better trained and probably just more experienced based on their age. But I have seen training programs in the services. I just don't know that they're necessarily aligned and they're all equal. There certainly needs to be more work done to make sure that that level of training is consistent and effective.
Thank you. Ms. Hinton? You can answer any of the questions I posed on this topic.
Yes, ma'am. So I would take the question for the record as it applies to the civilian workforce and joint professional military education. We certainly, as part of our leadership development competencies for our civilian workforce, use the joint professional military education venues as an avenue for our civilians to grow and develop the same competencies as our military, but I'll have to take your question for the record.
Mr. Sherman?
Ma'am, I would agree with everything my colleague said, and also for the record, the one thing I would add is on the College of Information and Cyber at National Defense University. This is, of course, aligned to Joint Staff and support them, but as a functional advocate for them, we are strongly supportive of them, and as General Crall indicated, they turn out many, many good graduates, many of whom work for me as well, and we think it should be sustained and continued. We're a big fan of it. Thank you.
Mr. Litton?
Yes, ma'am. If I might, tangentially related issue is one of the most exciting things to me in this area is the U.S. Space Force. They are creating a digital service from the ground up. The Chief of Space Operations, John Raymond, has directed his leaders to improve digital education across all members of the Space Force. To that end, the Space Force has stood up a digital university which gives air and space professionals access to over 7,000 training courses in which they can access on duty, off duty, and receive qualifications and certifications to that end. He's also directed his leaders in the U.S. Space Force to build a cadre of software developers, super coders, he's calling them, with the skills, knowledge, and ability to access the right and deploy software to military systems at the speed of relevance. Yes, ma'am.
We don't have a Space Force Academy, should we?
Ma'am, that's a good question. I think right now that the United States Air Force Academy is doing an adequate job. I think as the Space Force grows and matures, that's something that the department should take a hard look at.
Do you believe that the U.S. Air Force has the state-of-the-art cyber technology department?
Well, all of the services have cyber capability. All of the services are really doing their best and trying really hard to acquire that talent and develop them to meet the need of the warfighters. That's more kind of in General Crall's lane than mine. Mine is the policy to access and enable the services to retain and support those members.
Lieutenant General Crall, can you speak to having a Space Force Academy, whether the Air Force has enough expertise in developing it, and speak to perhaps, I know West Point has a cyber program. Can you speak to each of these departments and whether they need to augment what they offer or whether they are doing what they need to do sufficiently?
So, ma'am, I'll have to take the comment on the Academy and whether the Air Force has an adequate, a presence. I'd have to take that for the record because I don't know.
Okay.
But to the other question about where the talent comes from across all the services, I think it's important to note that if we believe, and I do believe, that United States Cyber Command has amassed really our most technical individuals in the cyber community, it's important to note from where they come. Those are service-provided individuals. So as Cyber Command sets as a joint force provider and joint force trainer that common curricula and standard, it's the services who are recruiting and putting those individuals through the pipeline. So I think the services do have pretty good footing and a pretty equitable talent base.
Can we get a report on that? Of what is the personnel makeup of Cyber Command and an analysis to the question about whether we should be standardizing the teaching across service members, but also across service academies, but also the question of, do we need a Space Force Academy? And then, which you've already said, you do believe that we could have a separate federal cyber academy for all federal workforce needs, not just the services.
Yes, ma'am, I'll take that for the record.
I'd like your opinion on it. Mr. Tillis?
Just for my part,
Senator Hirono is on WebEx. Senator Hirono.
Hello. Thank you, Madam Chair.
We can hear you.
This is for the panel. In Hawaii, we have several cyber education programs that work collaboratively with the NSA and DHS, such as the National Centers of Academic Excellence in Cyber Defense and Center of Academic Excellence in Research. However, we also struggle to retain these trained cybersecurity experts in Hawaii. One thing we find in Hawaii is that we can have a lot of excellent people who come to Hawaii, but if they don't particularly have ties to the community, they tend to cycle out. So my first question is, how is the Cyber Workforce Management Board, CWMB, collaborating with other federal and state agencies where relevant to continue investments in education, particularly in STEM programs, to meet the growing need of cybersecurity professionals? And particularly probably in a state like Oahu, how do we go out and reach the local community to engage in these kinds of educational programs? Because they are more inclined to stay in Hawaii once they get their education. Panel?
Hi, yes, Senator Hirono, this is Ms. Hinton. I'll touch on two areas, and then I'll ask my colleague, Mr. Sherman, to talk a little bit about the broader interagency collaboration. Through the Chief Human Capital Officers Council, the Federal Chief Human Capital Officer Council, we look at these broad-reaching interagency challenges and work in partnership with the Federal Chief Information Officers Council to identify innovative program solutions that get to the problems that you identify specifically, whether it's retention, recruitment, and we work together to identify those best practices that if one agency has found a way to solve an issue, how do we share that across the interagency space? We're particularly doing that as well within the national security workforce in identifying, are there specific challenges associated with the recruitment and retention of, say, the cyber workforce, and how can we learn from each other? To Hawaii specifically, I would mention the department's ability to retain our talent in some of our remote locations or locations where we've seen throughput. We've relied and leaned heavily on our authorities to offer incentives and to incentivize talent to stay in those locations where we need them. And we have found success in using those incentive programs, but we've also found that we have to go pretty close to the cap of our authority in order to retain talent in these places. And so as we use our incentives more and more, we're finding that it's taking taking us to that 25% cap, which the department is authorized to use for these relocation retention incentives. And we can envision a future state where we will need higher authority to compete with industry to retain individuals in these locations.
Thank you. Anyone else want to weigh in?
Senator, this is John Sherman, acting CIO, ma'am. Just to, I think Ms. Hinton hit many of the key points, and we are proud of the 5 centers of academic excellence within the state of Hawaii that we're able to work with through the NSA accreditation there. With regard to working across the interagency, Ms. Hinton talked about the Federal CIO Council where best practices are shared. We're also doing things in terms of, say, how career succession happens, we have something called the Cyber Pathways tool that we developed in concert with DHS and VA to show cyber professionals how they can work across different trade crafts, what their career path could look like, and that was a good interagency effort between VA, DHS, and the Department of Defense. We are sharing best practices. Of course, within the Department of Defense, we're very pleased to have the cyber accepted service authorities you all in Congress have provided to us, and we do use those aggressively and are continuing to expand those and then share our lessons learned with some of our interagency partners. So there is an active dialogue on that, and we are trying to be forward-leaning in that regard. Thank you.
I'm glad to hear that there are efforts to work with the other departments, because these are there are some common challenges with regard to recruiting and retaining a cyber educated force. How is DOD partnering or working with universities across the country to provide a pipeline to DOD's cyber workforce? Either, well, any of the panelists.
Senator, this is John Sherman again, the acting CIO. You noted the Centers for Academic Excellence, an NSA accredited program that we advocate for here at the Department of Defense level across many dozens of institutions all across the country, constantly adding more to that. And the neat thing about this is as schools come in, other schools can help shepherd them to get their accreditation. And it really is a truly, truly diverse grouping of schools. I was noting a minute ago, it's everything from Tuskegee University to Honolulu Community College, from University of Maryland, Columbia to North Carolina A&T. There's many, many schools in this. And the goodness of this is bringing in the different institutions across a very diverse population, rural, urban, otherwise, to get to a broader, more diverse set of candidates and students and places where it can not only apply the scholarships to and get them on board through there, but to get people interested in working in the Department of Defense who might not otherwise think about a cyber career in national security. So this is something we're very excited about. It's an ongoing effort. It requires effort by the schools to get the accreditation, but it is very diverse, as I said, through community colleges all the way to much larger institutions, ma'am.
I am running out of time, but this may have been touched upon before, but are you making concerted efforts to recruit women and minority people?
Senator, this is Veronica Hinton. Absolutely, and we appreciate the authorities Congress has given us, in particular around direct hiring authorities that enable us to target our recruitment to underrepresented, underserved communities. We have found that using these authorities have enabled us to expand our outreach, to go where the talent is, and to attract them into the department. We see through these authorities, whether they're student direct hire authorities or general streamlined direct hire authorities, that we have had results in increasing minority hires, in particular with our student authorities. As I mentioned earlier, we have in the past fiscal year, 20% of our student cyber hires have been 20% Asian American. We've seen growth in our African American as well as our female representation. So we really appreciate the authorities that enable us to diversify the workforce and really find where the talent pools are, to partner with minority serving institutions and other colleges and universities to get at this issue.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Horno. Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I won't ask any more questions here, but Mr. Litton, I am going to offer a couple of questions for the record, particularly around the Temporary Promotion Authority for the DDS, kind of an idea of what slots have been provided, or if none have, why not? Also on constructive credit, I think the Army's the only one that seems to be using it now. Curious why there's a reluctance or why it hasn't been implemented in the other service lines. And Mr. Sherman, I want to dig a little bit deeper, not for the purposes of this or for the purposes of future considerations, the clearance issue. You know, when we do security clearance, you got maybe a hot shot. It's going to take 90 days or more to get the clearance, and we had given some authority to provide, I think, unclassified workspace to onboard them. That may work, but I'd like to talk more we can talk about after the hearing, give us feedback on how we can accelerate that. The clearance process is a problem across the whole of government, but in this particular field where there are highly sought after resources, we can have a lot of leakage if we don't get better at it, onboard them as quickly as possible. So we'll talk about that after the hearing and make sure my staff follow up. Madam Chair, thank you for the hearing. This is very important. And again, we welcome your feedback on things that we should be looking at to either tune or introduce additional authorities to tackle this, because I tend to agree with General Crall's sobering mindset. We've got a lot of work to do here if we want to get the run rate where we need it. Thank you all.
If anybody wants to answer Senator Tillis's question now, because you know the answer, please do, because I had the same question about how do we increase the time for security clearances? How do we speed it up?
I would just add, ma'am, we will need to take that for the record as we work with the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security and the Defense Security and DCSA, I always get backwards on that, DCSA, to make sure we have their input on that. We will take that for the record and make sure we get you a holistic answer back on that, ma'am.
Thank you. Mr. Litton, in your testimony, you mentioned that the basis eligibility criteria and screening process for military service is the same as it is for recruits, as it is for non-cyber military occupational specialties. Are current military service standards restricting our ability to fill the ranks with the cyber talent we need? If so, how do you recommend addressing this issue? And how do we balance the need for officers to possess the cyber-specific skills and knowledge necessary for their branch, but also the leadership skills necessary for them to enjoy meaningful career progression and be competitive for leadership and command opportunities?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for that question. Overall, recruiting, both in the enlisted and the officer corps in general, has been very good. I think the Military Incident Processing Command has done a tremendous job during this COVID environment, keeping the MEP stations open and keeping that pipeline flowing for those that want to serve their country and filling the ranks in the military services. Right now, our retention is really excellent. I think it has been a benefit, if you will, for the department of this uncertain environment that we currently find ourselves in, that all the retention numbers are well over 100%. So that being said, our recruiting and retention specifically for our cyber warriors is good. There are some specific areas in which we are below our needs, but generally those are because we have increased the requirements on the other end. So we're fighting on one end to bring in the right person, but also those requirements increasing on the other end make it a dual challenge, if you will.
Does anyone else want to add to that answer?
Senator, I would echo Mr. Litton's comments. We find the same dynamic on the civilian side. Our retention rates, in particular for our cyber workforce, are generally good. And generally across the department, we see that folks aren't really leaving right now just because of the uncertain dynamic. But we find that there are pockets of challenges within the cyber workforce, in particular as we talk to Army Cyber Command and some of the very specific, very highly technical areas. We do see some churn there that we're using and leveraging all our authorities to close those gaps. But there is a dearth of expertise in the country in some of these instances, and so we bring to bear what we can, but certainly we can do more.
Maybe for Lieutenant General Crall and Mr. Sherman, what are the differences between civilian versus uniformed employees in our cyber workforce? What strategic advantages do each bring, and what percentage of current cyber workforce is civilian versus military? What do you think the proper mix should be? And how do we ensure we have the proper mix 5 years and 10 years from now?
I'll go on that first part about the current mix, ma'am. We have what's called the Defense Cyber Workforce Framework, where we capture this data. We have roughly, as we've got the skill sets coded, 65,000 civilians and 67,000 military in the ranks there. In terms of the mix, and I'll defer to General Crall to amplify this, the military brings longer consistency, longer term, not I want to say expertise, but time on target there. The civilians, you may have a little bit different turnover, and of course, the different richness of skill set and experiences, perhaps from industry or academia or elsewhere. My personal view as acting CIO is that this is about the right mix we have now in terms of about the half and half to keep that modulated. And just to build on what Ms. Hinton said, we do have certain skill sets that are very applicable, as Senator Tillis was indicating at the outset, about that out in the civilian workforce. Cyber operators, for example, is one of the coded ones. Network assessors, jobs that could get very quickly picked up in the private sector. And using this framework, blocking and tackling we have, we can watch as these get below about a 10% or get above a 10% rate that we need to start when the vacancies get above a certain area, that we can start amping up the hiring and using the cyber accepted service authorities you all have granted to us to start doing things like targeted local market supplement, TMLS, for living in the national capital region and so on. So we try to use that to modulate, but the mix, I believe, is about right, but I'll defer to General Crall and others for their views.
I think in a generic sense, the mix is about right, the way it sits now. There are trade-offs, and those trade-offs, I agree with the acting CIO in that you get some consistency on the military side. People tend to, that make careers of it, stick around, and they have a unique experience that relates very well to the combatant commands. And make no mistake, from the Joint Staff, focused on warfighting and looking at meeting combatant command needs, those relationships work out quite well. What you trade, though, however, is some of the experience and currency that we tend to get from our civilian workforce, especially those who move in and out from industry back to service with us. And so I would probably like to keep both of those pipelines open. But your most difficult question that you asked was not so much how are things working out today, but what does that mix look like in 5 years? I think that's the unknown. I don't know the answer to that. But my guess is it probably won't look like it looks today, because we have not onboarded the very capabilities that we need to employ. Machine learning, autonomy, artificial intelligence, a real cloud-based environment, pushing that processing to the tactical edge, and a reformed network. So the speed with which that's going to require us to operate is going to have a level of human-machine interface we've never had before. And it's hard for me to believe that the force we're looking at today is necessarily rightly aligned to that new mission set. We're going to have to lead turn this and keep a careful eye on what those skill sets are necessary to bring this on board, and we might have to throttle that mix and that balance to get there.
And I'm sorry, ma'am. I was just going to add just one other thing to what General Crall was saying. Absolutely, on the cloud-based capabilities, data, AI, some of the things I mentioned in my opening statement. And the one thing we're going to have to get our head around is, as we do, particularly on the civilian side, bringing them in, we not might be bringing them in for 30 years. Indeed, they may come in for 4 years and go out to industry and then come back to us in 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And that's not a bad thing, to stay super current with industry practices, academia, and elsewhere. And with our cyber accepted service authorities, we're able to operate in that space, but this is a different mindset, particularly with our civilians. We may not want to hire data scientists for more than 3 or 4 years. We may want them to go back to industry, reaffirm their technological bona fides, and then come back to us later. It's a different mindset we need to get around.
And ma'am, if
Go
I
ahead,
could
Ms. Hinton.
expand on that. And we need the pathways and the pipeline to be able to do that, the authorities to be able to do that, to have the fungible workforce that gets their experience in industry, comes back into the department, and maybe goes back out. And so.
So you're saying we do need additional authorities to do that?
Correct.
Okay, so I would like everyone on this panel to write a letter to the committee what those authorities would look like to have the flexibility we will need 5 years, 10 years out to get people coming in and out of the private sector to keep their knowledge current. Anything else? I cut you off, so did you want to say more?
No, thank
you. Okay, thank you. Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Hinton, let me come back to you, if I could, and ask you a question about our friends at the big tech companies. Just give us a sense of, on the committee, have they been supportive of DOD's efforts to attract the cyber talent that we need to protect our national security, or are you seeing these companies counter and compete and stand in the way of DOD's recruitment efforts?
I wouldn't couch it in an adversarial manner. Thank you for the question, Senator. Certainly, we are in a competition with the big tech. But at the same time, they have also been friends to the department. We have used the private public talent exchange authority that Congress has given us to open up those pathways to allow our employees to go learn from industry and to allow industry to come learn from the department. We are in the process of expanding that authority based on direction in the last NDAA. But certainly, as we look at our compensation authorities and try to compete, we can't compete based on money. Quite frankly, in some areas we can. We do have some authorities, but across the board, generally, we can't win the money competition. So we win the service competition, the call to service, to serve the country. We work on some incredibly advanced opportunities, and that's where we win the universities, we win the industry. So I would say a mix of partnership, but also a mix of competition.
Very good. Speaking of universities, I'm curious how the department's used scholarships or other programs for high school students and college students to attract, top quality talent.
We have a mix of programs, Senator, that we use, whether it's the Cyber Scholarship Program, whether it's the STEM Scholarship Program. We have a plethora of scholarships, fellowships, internships, where we use that to go after talent. We're also looking at the Defense Civilian Training Corps, which is a new authority we received in the FY20 NDAA to stand up ROTC-like program. We use our direct hire authority. We have a student direct hire authority that enables us to reach out and directly hire students into the department. That has proven to be a successful authority, albeit with some limitations. So we have a variety of tools available to us.
I'm curious if there are any particular regions that you targeted or types of schools.
We target a variety of universities, a variety of schools, depending on the mission sets that we need. We have a diverse network of partnerships with a variety of universities, a variety of outreach programs that help us find talent. Mr. Sherman, if you have some specifics.
Sure. There's dozens and dozens, Senator, of schools. We were talking about this a little bit earlier, from community colleges all the way up to University of Missouri, Columbia, to very large schools. Excuse me, I'm sorry, sir. Everything from rural to urban. So we're aiming for a very broad swath of talent to get these Centers of Academic Excellence accreditations. I'm very sorry, to be able to do that. Also, Ms. Hinton mentioned these ROTC-focused efforts we have going on. There's 6 institutions: Texas A&M, North Georgia, Virginia Tech, VMI, Citadel, and Norwich. All schools have large ROTC programs to encourage the cadets there to focus on cyber. And within some of them, for example, Citadel, within the Charleston area, is reaching out to schools within the area and high schools and so on. So they're taking this kind of a step further there as well. So the bottom line, sir, is a pretty broad shot group there, what we're trying to go after, getting the most diverse talent and folks who may not have thought of a career at the Department of Defense or National Security. And one other thing Ms. Hinton noted, and if I can go to this about the why do people come to work, and it goes to the education piece, they can make more money in tech. But where else can you go after ISIS or help us stand up against the Chinese or thwart the Russians? There's a certain amount of, you can't do this anywhere else. And so we may get them for 4 years. Maybe they go off to industry and make more money. The key is getting them back after that, for the next bite at the apple for a higher level of management or technical capacity they would have, sir.
Let me just ask you in closing, when you think about the mix of programs and recruitment tools that you've just been talking about, have any proved particularly successful or effective you'd look at and say that has really been good for us?
Veronica, can I defer you on that?
Sir, I feel like a broken record, but I really am very thankful. The department is very thankful and appreciative of the direct hire authorities because they enable us to get through the hurdles and the inefficiencies in some of the Title V hiring authorities and really get to where is the talent, how do we bring them in, how do we attract them without having to go through the overly burdensome hiring process that we had. So it has been, they have proven to be an effective tool. And I would couple that with the Cyber Accepted Service Authority that we have, that we're growing, that has proven to be another effective personnel tool.
Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sir, if I could offer one piece to that, not often well received, but I think important to note, not all of our talent comes from credentialed degree holders. We have a lot of talent that comes in our enlisted forces or maybe with no degree whatsoever that have shown unbelievable prowess and acumen in this field. And so while I would never dismiss the idea of pursuing the formally trained university partnerships, which go a long way to some of our high-end performers, we have a lot of performers who are not, they don't hold degrees, and they have proven extremely valuable to our workforce.
Just a couple questions on our Cyber Reserve and our National Guard. In the fiscal year 21 National Defense Authorization Act, it required leaders in the DOD to evaluate reserve models tailored to support cyberspace operations. I'm interested in the possibility of creating more flexible options for personnel who want to serve but want alternatives to full-time active duty service. We look forward to receiving that report. To inform our reading of it when it comes, thank you, Senator, how is the department currently thinking of non-traditional military reserve models for service on cyber issues? What are the current military reserve options for individuals who have cyber skills and are interested in service? And then on the National Guard question, we asked for a report to evaluate the use of National Guard for the response to and recovery from significant cyber incidents. As you conduct that evaluation, what is your long-term vision for the successful integration of the National Guard into cyber incident response? And what should the collaboration be between the National Guard Bureau and federal agencies looking like in preparing for and establishing resilience to future cyber incidents? Whoever wants to address it can address it.
I see everyone looking at me. So, ma'am, we certainly owe you the details in the reports that you had mentioned. You know, I had a chance recently, the week before last, to get up to Washington State and talk to one of their elite Guard units there on cyber. Incredibly impressive. Clearly, they're not the only one. Those are starting to grow, both in numbers and competency. It offers the very thing that I opened up with. People want to live where they want to live and do the work they want to do. I think it also gets after the comment that the senator asked about how do you retain that talent in the state, in your state, for example, Hawaii. That's certainly one way to get after that. It offers the financial incentives that go after that. But nobody knows your local territory like your Guard. So if you think about election security and the infrastructure involved with that state, they know their infrastructure better than most. So I think that there's a lot of room for both Guard and reserves to get after your comment on integrating resiliency and that additive feature that appears to be very attractive to many. I believe we need more Guard units, specifically with the cyber competency, maybe even as a standalone entity, as a specialty, would be my opinion on that.
Please make sure that's addressed in the report that's forthcoming. And then just one last question from Mr. Sherman Hinton, and maybe again, Lieutenant General Crall. This is about the private sector and just enhancing our relationship. Your opening statement cited the emerging practice of private industry to create a human supply chain by partnering with universities to provide ready supply of talented, trained individuals into all our cyber forces. Should the DOD seek to establish such a reserve via partnerships like the private sector in doing with the nation's colleges and universities, and what should that system look like for anyone?
I think we could certainly take that on board to consider how formalized that should be. As Senator Hawley was asking, I was going to pile on to one other thing there about there's not an adversarial relationship. There is a very symbiotic relationship right now with much of industry in terms of the tech sector, in terms of support for what we're trying to do. Now, there is high competitiveness for those very in-demand skill sets, but recognizing the national security roles when folks come in here for a few years and then maybe go back out to industry and so on. In terms of special authorities, ma'am, we'll have to take that on board to think about that. But it would also just be us, back to the original point a few minutes ago, recognizing the permeability of folks coming in and out, and whether that requires special authorities or not, we'll definitely take that on board, and whether that requires anything special vis-a-vis industry, we would have to consider. So thank you for the question.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the question. I agree with Acting CIO Sherman. We will take it for the record to look at the authorities that we have and authorities we may need. We have had conversations around the notion of opening up pathways for individuals to come in and out of service. You know, whether or not that translates into a civilian reserve corps of individuals to fill talent gaps is a conversation we're having right now, and we can come back with you with further information.
Thank you, everyone, for participating. Senator Tillis, do you have anything else?
No, thank you very much. We appreciate your answers to questions, and again, we'll submit a few for the record. But thank you for being here. Thank you for having this hearing.
Thank you for your dedication. Adjourned.